Hey gamers, Blindy here. It is May 2024, and I recently just finished playing Code Vein. Before I get into my review, I'm going to go over some of the game's details first, so stick around. This game was originally released on September 27th, 2019. And if you're interested, there's 3 DLC and a season pass, all of which that I own, but I don't recall ever getting into them much more than using one skin. This game was developed by Bandai Namco. You'll be familiar with them for developing such games as the Tekken series, Ace Combat, Soul Calibur, Super Smash Bros., and Pac-Man. And they also published other famous games such as Dark Souls, Elden Ring, the Katamari series, and Little Nightmares. This game was originally released for the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and PC. It took them about 5 years to develop, and since its release has sold over 3 million copies. Now, I played the game on my Steam Deck, the original LCD version, and if you're looking to get this game on Steam, it retails for about $80 Canadian, but it's very frequently on sale for 85% off. So you're looking at about $12 for the game at its cheapest rate that I found. And this game doesn't have a difficulty setting to start initially. You have to end up beating the game first to determine if you want to play on a higher difficulty level after that. For me, this was my second time running through the game, but I still played it on the standard difficulty. And to install this game, you're going to need over 35 gigabytes worth of space. Now, according to Steam, this game is playable on the Steam Deck, but I found no major issues with it, so I would generally lean toward it being verified. And I was able to get about an hour and a half per charge for my Steam Deck per playtime. And according to Metacritic, we're looking at about low to mid 70s for their approval ratings, and it's up to 85% on Steam, with about 35,000 reviews in. And ESRB has this rated as an M, for blood, partial nudity, and violence. And on how long to beat, they have this game rated at about 26 hours for the main story, and that seems a bit off to me. It took me over 41 hours on this playthrough. It was about 39 hours on my first playthrough. And to be perfectly honest, about 10 of those hours were just trying to fight off 3 different bosses. All the rest of the game was fairly straightforward, but even then, I think that 26 hour mark is a little bit low. Either that or I just suck at fighting those bosses. So before we go any further, I'll let you know that I will do my best not to show any spoilers. There will be some gameplay, I'll talk about some of the mechanics and show some of the cutscenes, but I will do what I can not to show anything too important. So consider that this is your warning. So you start off the game waking up as a revenant. Now a revenant is basically a human that is now dependent on using blood to survive, but it's not a vampire story, so it's not weird like that. And revenants that allow their bloodthirst to overcome them go into a frenzy, and then they become a lost. And a lost is generally all the enemies that you see within the game. Humans can provide blood, but a lot of blood comes from blood beads, which are grown from these tree-like structures called blood springs. And it is those that can be consumed for revenants to survive. If you're familiar with various Souls games, you'll know that enemies drop souls and you pick them up. In this game, those are referred to as haze. So when you die, you drop the amount of haze that you've been carrying, and then you could go and pick them up later. We also have miasma. It's a type of fog that's covering up the entire map, and that could be cleared slowly by activating missiles. They're these flower-like structures that you could activate, and those are your save points. Those are where you could upgrade all your abilities, and it also clears the visibility of the nearby area. So that's most of the story in a nutshell. It gets way more complicated than that, and I really can't get into it because, to be perfectly honest, I don't really understand some of it myself. But if you're a type of person that likes to experience the story of a game, I think this one's got a decent one. And if you're the type of person that doesn't really care about the story and just wants to play the game, it might feel that the story gets a bit heavy and dense and kind of unnecessary. And besides the main story, there are also items called vestiges that you can pick up. And by activating these vestiges, you're able to walk through a moment in time of somebody's memory. And you just kind of have to see it to understand it. But I think it's a really cool system to see what the story was in the past and what actually happened at that time. So this game is a Souls-like game. It is one where you'll receive a lot of damage from enemies, but if you have really precise timing, you will be rewarded. You have a stamina meter for your attacks and dodges, so keep that in mind. It will deplete pretty fast, but it will recover pretty fast as well. You could dodge, parry, and block within this game. Dodging gives you invincibility in that small time frame that you're rolling or dashing. You can parry, which will allow you to counter enemies' movements. And then blocking allows you to not die as quickly. And you have the ability to lock onto enemies, which is really handy. You can just worry about moving left and right, forward and backward without having to adjust your camera. But it can be a little bit finicky as well too, especially if you just kill the enemy that you're locked onto. It doesn't automatically lock onto the next enemy, so you have to do that manually. And that could be a little bit cumbersome as well, because you may be facing the wrong direction and your camera will just snap in a different direction that you wanted it to go. Like I mentioned before, there are missiles, those flowers that you could activate. And those are kind of important in the sense that if you clear out an enemy, that enemy will stay dead until you rest at a missile. So if you're exploring quite a bit, all those enemies that you fought previously will not come back unless you rest at a missile site. And one of this game's major features is the use of blood codes. It's a way to dynamically change between different play styles. So you could become a bruiser or you could be more agility based. And I never used it very often. I tried to stick with one and just ride with it until I felt like I needed a change. But it's not one that I constantly changed between while I was away from missile site. And the other major gimmick in this game is the use of an AI character as a sidekick. They're really helpful as far as managing enemies, especially if you have multiple enemies. They're able to draw the attention of the enemies. They actually fight fairly well. And their biggest benefit is that they're able to revive you if you die. On the other hand, it is AI, so sometimes they end up just taking all the damage without dodging any of it, and they die before you're able to use them to their best abilities. So considering this is a Souls-like game, this is, from my understanding, easier than a Souls game. I haven't yet played one of those before, so I can't say definitively, but because you have an AI sidekick that can revive you when you die, it definitely makes things a lot easier to manage. But that being said, there are still some very difficult parts to this game, or like I said before, I just suck at the game, and maybe Souls-like games aren't my preferred style of gameplay. I just don't know. If you're the type of person that really likes to dive deep into creating a character, I think this game is really good for that. It's hard for me to say because I really don't care about spending too much time creating a character, but I spent a little bit of time trying to make my character look right. So I think this game is really good for that because you're able to see your character often. There are a lot of games where you could spend an hour creating a character and never really see their face again in the rest of the game. Not in this game. You're going to be able to see your character's face both in combat and in cutscenes, and just spinning the camera around. I think they all do a pretty good job as far as showing what you're able to build. And you're going to pick up a lot of items in this game, and you're not going to use most of them, unfortunately. Some of them can be helpful, but if you're in a situation that's really challenging, the use of items don't turn the tables that much. And I really like the environments in this game. I found that most of the environments were really nice to look at. They were varied, they had some creativity to them. It's interesting though, because when I've looked up reviews for this game, I found that was one of the biggest complaints. So I don't know, maybe I just have a different artistic aesthetic or something. I don't know what to say, but I really liked it. I think a lot of the places looked cool in this game. And this game had some really cool music as well. If you're into that kind of thing, if you're a music listener and you really pay attention to the music in games, I think that this game has some really nice music to listen to. On the other hand, there are some things that suck, such as the entire cathedral level. When you get there, you'll totally understand. It is way bigger, way longer, and way more bland visually than I think any other level has. That being said, I mean, it looks cool for about the first hour or so, but when you're past that point, it's just slow and everything is white, and it's really difficult to keep your energy up as you're trying to figure out this maze-like area. So the story is kind of difficult, it's convoluted, and it's more complicated than it probably should be, but I kind of like it. And on top of that, I really like the characters too. I thought the characters were a lot of fun to listen to. The voice acting was great, and I was cool with playing alongside any of them. Like I said, there are some difficult parts of this game. The bosses are definitely one of them. The Lost Invasions were another. So it was basically where a bunch of enemies swarm you all at once. You're probably looking at about 20, 30 enemies or so, and you have to try to survive it. Those could be super challenging depending on which one it is. So it's not just one enemy at a time within this game. There are times where you may be forced to fight off dozens at a time. And let's talk about those bosses too. Some of the bosses are fairly easy, especially early on, but later in the game, they just seem to be extremely unforgiving. You could be playing near perfectly for 2/3 of the fight, and then all of a sudden you miss one dodge, and he chains you for 3 attacks, and next thing you know, you're dead. Or if you're not dead, you might be low enough that you can't be effective in the battle, and your AI partner dies. Or your AI partner revives you, which uses up nearly all of their life, and they get one hit into death, and now you are soloing the boss in front of you. It can be very frustrating if things don't work out just perfectly. Now, if you ever get lost in this game, there is a map board in the home base area, and if you check it out, it'll kind of give you an idea where to go. It doesn't hold your hand, it doesn't give you waypoints or anything like that. It kind of just tells you the region that you want to be searching in. So one of the other issues I have with this game is that the diversity in the enemy types are kind of lacking. Especially later in the game, I found that enemies all were pretty much the same as before, or they were slightly different than previous versions. I think they could have done a lot more to make their enemy diversity much more interesting. And sometimes after you're fighting a boss and you die, you have to run from the last missile site that you're at to the boss arena. And some of those areas are such a long distance away from each other. Some of them put you right next to the boss arena, which is great. But sometimes, and like I'll show you here on the screen, you could be running for a long time just to get back to the boss fight, and then die and do it over again. And I found this game suffered a little bit from frame rate lag on my Steam Deck. It may not be significant on a PC or maybe even on a console, so I don't know how specific it is to the Steam Deck or since I was recording or any of those issues. Most notably, it was between areas where there was nothing in between. You could tell it was kind of a loading area. So there weren't any enemies, there weren't any items or anything like that, but the frame rate would drop quite significantly in some areas. Alright, so with all that said, would I recommend this game? I'm gonna definitely say yes. I really like the game, and if you're really looking into playing a Souls-like game, especially if you haven't experienced one before, I think this is a good one. This is kind of an intermediate one where you could still feel the challenge of a Souls-like without being completely crushed by a Souls game. And especially if you like the art style of this, it gives you quite a few hours of gameplay, some replayability as well. There's lots of ways to experiment and explore and things like that. So I think I would recommend this game, especially if you're looking to challenge yourself with an action game. And to score this game, I'm going to give this game a 9 out of 10. 90%. I really like this game. I have so much fun playing it. Even when I spend 10 hours trying to fight off 3 bosses, I'll still play it again. And realistically, I'll look forward to it the next time I challenge this game again. Alright, so with all that said, I'm going to give you just a brief taste of what that final boss fight looks like. Here we go. Alright, so I've covered a lot, but I didn't cover everything. Was I fair? Was I wrong? Let me know in the comments. Before we go, I'd like to thank all of my patrons on Patreon. Of course, I am just kidding. I don't have a Patreon page, but I do have a Discord channel. So if you want to join me on it, there's nobody else in there, so it'd be just the two of us chatting away. We could chat about games or anything else that you'd like to. I'm available, so come say hi. And lastly, I'd like to thank you for joining me today and watching my video. Without you, I'm just some weirdo talking into a microphone. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I'd appreciate it if you hit that like button. If you loved the video, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.